Well, America, in just four short days, we will all be riding with Biden. And this week, we officially got the first major policy proposal from the incoming Joe Biden administration, now that we finally got the bad orange man out of there.
Melissa, the Biden administration is unveiling a $1.9 trillion economic proposal that will serve as the opening point for negotiations with Congress for a first stage rescue package as it tries to grapple with both the economic crisis and the pandemic during the first weeks in office.
$1.9 trillion. That seems like a lot of money to me. Remember, when the Obama administration passed a stimulus bill in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, it was only in the $700 billion range. This number was totally inadequate to deal with the economic crisis at the time, and it was probably the main reason why Democrats suffered historic losses in the 2010 midterms. But what is also different about the stimulus package nowadays that the Biden administration is proposing is that for the most part, it's not your typical Democrat-brained combination of means-tested tax cuts, although there is some of that. So what's in it? Let's let the CNBC reporter explain.
Let's start with the pandemic pillar, which itself is about $400 billion. There's $160 billion for a national vaccine program. $20 billion of that will be partnerships with states. $50 billion will go to expanding national testing. $30 billion for additional supplies and PPE for frontline workers, and $170 billion for schools, both K through 12 and higher education.
Okay, so $400 billion for a vaccine rollout. That's good. We need that. Getting the vaccine in as many people's hands as possible in the quickest way possible is the most important thing that the Biden administration can do right now. And Biden is promising to increase the federal government's role in the vaccine rollout, which is also a good thing because the federal government is big and powerful and can more easily coordinate than if you just leave it up to our dysfunctional federalized system. So that's good. What else is in there?
As for the second pillar, $1 trillion in direct aid to individuals through several different programs. First, another $1,400 per person check. That's on top of the $600 checks authorized in December. An increase of weekly federal employment benefits to $400 a week that would go until the end of September. $30 billion in rental assistance and extending the eviction ban through September, increasing earned income and child care tax credits, and also raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
Okay, so $1 trillion in direct aid to people. That sounds good. But remember how Ossoff and Warnock ran on the plank that if you elected them to the Senate, you'd get a $2,000 check? Well, it turns out that the Democrats are now saying that it's actually $1,400 checks because you already got the $600 checks from the last bill. And here's where we start to see that Democrat brain disease creep in a little bit. $2,000 checks have become a symbolic benchmark, something to rally people around. The difference between $1,400 checks and $2,000 checks is about $200 billion in total. The total bill is $1.9 trillion as it stands. Why not start with $2.1 trillion and go from there? I mean, what difference is it? $200 billion here or there? It's not a big deal. Anyway, there is this federal $15 minimum wage plank in there, which is really remarkable for anyone who is old enough to remember when the Fight for 15 movement started back in 2012 and how annoying liberals were when they laughed at them for being totally unrealistic. Not so funny anymore, huh? Well, the Biden plan also has a pretty substantial increase in childcare subsidies. The problem is that they come in the form of a tax credit. And as David Dane writes, the bill adopts the Brown-Bennett expansion of the child tax credit to $3,600 a year for children under 6 or $3,000 a year for children between 6 and 17. It's only a one-year expansion, as is an expansion of the earned income tax credit and money for the welfare block grant. There are much better ways to deliver these benefits, like with a flat check, than through a tax credit, which families won't see until 2022 and which denies the lowest income people in the economy any benefits. Again, Democrat brain, delivering a child care benefit through a tax credit bizarrely means that the poorest families, aka the ones that need it the most, don't get it. Matt Brunig has proposed an alternative model. Why don't we just send every parent checks in the mail? He writes, I argue that we should have the Social Security Administration simply send out $374 every month to every child in the country. The $374 figure is chosen because under the federal poverty guidelines, this is the amount it would take to ensure that no family ever slips into poverty solely because they added a child to their family. Again, this is the kind of simple policy that, if enacted, would transform the country and also ensure democratic victories for a generation. But they want tax credits. Okay, what else is in there?
Finally, the Biden team is proposing $350 billion for state and local governments, $20 billion for public transit, and a $50 billion increase to small business disaster grant and loan programs.
Okay, so that's money for state and local governments, which they desperately need. See, in our system, state and local governments can't run a deficit. So when the coronavirus hit, their tax base was absolutely destroyed because economic activity stopped. So that means local governments have to slash budgets and fire workers precisely when they needed them the most during an emergency. If you're thinking to yourself, wow, what a dumb system we have, well, you would be correct. We do have a very dumb system. So this Biden stimulus plan has a lot of good stuff in it. It is not a socialist budget that we at Jacobin would have proposed. It doesn't nationalize entire industries, for example. But I think it's safe to say that given what we know about Joe Biden and the Democrats, it's better than expected. Now the problem will be passing it. And in the words of Del Preston in Wayne's World 2, that's a whole other story altogether. You see, as Bloomberg writes, Biden is going to look to pass this with Republican support. Quote, President-elect Joe Biden will seek a deal with Republicans on another round of COVID-19 relief, rather than attempting to ram a package through without their support, according to two people familiar with the matter. The approach could mean a smaller initial package that features some priorities favored by Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. The idea is to forego using a special budget process that would remove the need to get the support of at least 10 Republicans in the Senate. Bipartisanship. It just gets the Democrats hard. That's what really, really, really gets them going. They're so terrified of doing anything on their own, and they always want to appear bipartisan, even though the people they are trying to be bipartisan with just whipped up their base into such a frenzy that they stormed the Capitol building just last week. Obama, for his part, spent 8 years trying to do the same thing, to win over Republicans, and look what it got him. And that Republican Party back then was tame compared to what it is now. The Democrats could push most of this package through a process called budget reconciliation. The Senate is like this weird parliamentary body. It has all kinds of arcane rules that are hard to understand. But the short of it is that through reconciliation, you don't need any Republican votes because a simple majority would do. That process is controlled by the senator who chairs the Budget Committee. And who is that? Well, by God, it's Bernie Sanders coming in with a steel chair. And he's got twerps like Paul Ryan running scared.
Let's take a look at Paul Ryan telling people in Madison what the power of the Senate means and rests on.
If we lose the Senate, do you know who becomes the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee? A guy named Bernie Sanders. You ever heard of him? This just tells you what we would be dealing with in a divided government if we lose control of the Senate.
Ooh, Bernie Sanders, ever heard of him? And according to the New York Times, quote, the nature of the process effectively gives Mr. Sanders a leading role in deciding how expansive and expensive Mr. Biden's ambitions for new taxes and spending will be. Mr. Sanders said it in the interview that he wanted an initial emergency stimulus package to be, quote, big. But he also wants to do some other things with healthcare. Quote, he also wants to create an emergency universal healthcare program so that anyone can get medical treatment during the pandemic, whether they currently have insurance or not. Giving people public healthcare, even if it's temporary, could be transformative. The New York Times continues. Mr. Sanders said he had been speaking with Mr. Biden about the scale and timing of stimulus legislation. He said that he did not intend to try to force his long-held priorities, such as Medicare for All, into a relief bill. However, he does intend to test the legal bounds of how reconciliation can be used so that Democrats can pass policies that go beyond traditional budget items and address, quote, structural problems in American society. So Biden is going to try to pass his pretty ambitious bill through regular order. But that seems like it's going to be a non-starter with Republicans, so it's going to waste a bunch of time. And then when they get desperate, they'll maybe try to do it through reconciliation. And it is comforting to know that Bernie is in there controlling that process. And as I was looking through the business channels to research this segment, I was struck by just how eager Wall Street investor types were for this stimulus package to pass. I mean, this segment on CNBC was fairly typical.
I was looking at some of the responses, for example, from Kevin Brady and House GOP leadership. And the general tone is, here we go again, trying to recapture what they didn't get in the HEROES Act, a grab bag of goodies from the Democrats. Do you think that really slows down what the president-elect is trying to get?
I don't think so. I mean, I know Kevin Brady, and I have a lot of respect for him. But he is one of the traditional deficit hawks that have been dwindling in the Republican Party. And given the data that's come in recent years, I just don't think the deficit is going to play right now as a major political issue, although there remains a cadre of Republicans, but not enough to really, I think, block this.
Are the deficit hawks losing their mojo? I mean, and then I kept watching and my eyes almost popped out of my head when I saw this guy.
And then, Jim, we go from this proposal to the next potential one, of course, focus on infrastructure, something that I think much of corporate America certainly supports, even if their tax rates were to go up a bit.
Corporate America supporting infrastructure, even if their tax rates go up a bit? Well, as producer Kale pointed out to me in a text, the left has to get the idea out of its head that in neoliberalism, capitalists want the state to do nothing. It's there to rationalize the contradictions and mitigate crises. It has a very important role to play, and it, of course, is mostly focused on figuring out the best political actions to help the most important sectors of capital. And the irony is that under Obama, the resistance to a large stimulus was absolutely hegemonic. It wasn't just Republicans, but important people within his own administration, like Rahm Emanuel and Larry Summers, who worked hard to limit the size of the package, which ultimately doomed his presidency. Now, in 2021, there will be resistance, but I get the sense that it is not as hegemonic as it was in 2009. The impact of the twin Sanders presidential campaigns, the organizing of volunteer and membership organizations, and some renewed labor militancy might be causing the left to be punching above its weight a bit right now. But that doesn't mean the Democrats won't fuck it up. They have been known to step on the rake in the past. And we should never forget capital's ability to strike back against politicians deviating from their interests. We have a long way to go to execute our political program. But if Joe Biden, the least inspiring man in the history of the world, manages to pass something meaningful during this crisis, it will go a long way to ensuring that he won't fail in the way his former boss did. Ariella, budget talk, baby. That's what we're doing here.
Yeah, I think we should start calling this show Squawk on the Street. I don't know how we missed that. It's so good. Yeah, I think Kale's point about, the role of the state is interesting. And for the last few years of the Trump presidency, I don't have this article to pull up right now, but the steelworkers unions were looking to invest in infrastructure and we're pushing him to do that. They were like, this is a huge part of your campaign. We want to partner with you. And they came to the conclusion that it was just rhetoric. So it'll be interesting to see when they've already, been lobbying for this, what they will do about Biden's promises around infrastructure. And I think Capital's approach to it is, yes, give us better roads and bridges. They're crumbling and we need them for our logistics, particularly with things moving towards shipping. I think we might see less resistance there because the money that they'll get in terms of the, tax increases, which, that doesn't mean much to them. I don't think that that's going to happen. But the money that they'll be getting or saving rather from these investments will be pretty significant for their business models. So, yeah, I think that that's where some of that support lies. They want the state to step in and fix it when it's good for business. And, this may be a case when that is.
Yeah, I just couldn't help but find it funny that Joe Biden, who's just, I find to be like a ridiculous figure in so many ways, just like he makes me laugh in a way that other politicians don't.
When he bites your finger.
Yeah, when he bites your finger, when he just talks about random things that from like the 1950s that no one cares about, or when he cuts an ad about like driving a car up and down a driveway saying like, oh boy, my dad could drive a car. And it's like, I just find it to be like a totally, absolutely ludicrous figure, whereas Obama, who I don't like at all, but you can recognize as a kind of impressive figure and very kind of resplendent in many ways, and obviously very intelligent and all the adjectives you could come up with. But because he, in the time he came up in, like, austerity was just so hegemonic, not just here but in Europe, that his presidency was just ultimately a total disaster. That Joe Biden, this like bumbling idiot, ludicrous figure, like if the hegemony of austerity is not as powerful as it was in 2009, that he may actually end up being a more successful president than Obama. And I just find that to be very kind of funny.
Yeah, I think part of their bipartisanship addiction is that it's a lot better to act like weakness, political weakness, is a part of your strategy than it is to admit, full out that you have no power, because that's what Obama was facing in his second term. And, to say, well, it's actually a virtue. It's turning the political weakness of that moment into a humble brag. Like, I'm just so bipartisan, I couldn't get anything done.
Right.
And I think the Democrats are really good at that. And I think they use it when it works to keep their message clear, right? Obama could say, I'm ambitious. These are the things that I want to do. I came up as a community organizer. I care about working people. He delivered a lot of speeches during the Bush administration about how exactly the stimulus money should be spent. He focused on, relief for the middle class. That rhetoric didn't come out of nowhere. But then when it became impossible to push it through, or maybe undesirable politically for him and for the donor class of the Democrats, you pivot to, sorry, I'm too bipartisan to do anything. And you scapegoat the bipartisanship. And I think the Democrats are really good at, kind of tricking the public into thinking that their weakness isn't deliberate. They did this with the Supreme Court nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, who just helped women not be able to get abortion pills unless they go physically into a clinic, which is great during a pandemic. And, I don't think that they wanted her out. I think that they wanted her in. She's a bulldog for capital. She hates workers. If you look at the other things that she does besides her like Christian cult that she's in, she has thwarted worker power in every case that it's been brought to her. And the Democrats were like, oh, what can we do? Oh, it's so bad. You should keep donating to us. Maybe one day we'll have the power to fix this. So, yeah, I think they're playing us a little bit with this. And I think it'll be interesting if there's a kind of realignment or even like a minor shift against austerity during the Biden administration. I think we're going to be hearing about some tactics that they'll say are novel, that they'll say were inaccessible previously, that actually were there the entire time. And I think a big part of their kind of caveat in the bill is that they're working it into the tax code, with the earned income tax credit. That's the way that Obama approached the Affordable Care Act. The politics of, the U.S. tax code is a different game, I think, than the politics of the social safety net.